Thank you to all of you who've joined to participate this evening. Thank you particularly to Michael Dugan, who I look forward to listening to in a moment. And thank you, because I'm conscious that there are quite a few people on this Zoom meeting who helped me personally during the course of the election. And I'd just like to reiterate my thanks to them for everything which they did. What I thought I would do to try and do a bit of scene setting as to the current political situation is, first of all, we just have to go, I think, very slightly back. We did indeed, as you rightly say, Peter, fail in our ambition of trying to get a second referendum, and I'm very sorry that that is the case. The reason, of course, why we failed was because ultimately we couldn't get the necessary momentum in Parliament for people to be willing to hold the Prime Minister's feet to the fire in early November last year, and for reasons which were explicable, but nevertheless I think were mistaken. A decision was made by the leader of the opposition, prompted by the leader of the Liberal Democrats initially, that an election was the sensible way out, when some of us thought that this was probably not the case. And so I'm afraid it proved, because as became quite obvious during the election campaign, there were very many people particularly in England, but I suspect elsewhere, who regarded the Labour leader as unelectable as a Prime Minister, and were sufficiently concerned and frightened about that prospect that nothing would induce them to take a decision that might prevent, therefore, the government returning to office, even though, as I realised on the doorstep when I was canvassing and campaigning, there were large numbers of people who were going to do that, who were very unenthusiastic about the direction of travel in which the government was taking us. The government has always said it had a mandate for taking us out of the EU. In a sense, it had the referendum mandate. I have never quibbled with that. But the hard reality is that on the day we voted in December, I think it's impossible to say there was a majority of people in the United Kingdom who wanted to leave, although it may well be that there was a majority of people in the United Kingdom who had got so bored, anxious, and fed up with what was going on that they were prepared to vote for almost anything or anybody who was going to bring to an end what appeared to be a rather nightmarish process that had been going on for over 3 years. The problem, as we all know, is that nightmares have a tendency to start again when you wake up and then you doze off. And the truth is that we are facing a continuing period of immense political uncertainty, linked to which there is now economic uncertainty. And as you rightly said, the economic uncertainty of COVID, when linked to the economic uncertainty of Brexit, produces a potentially toxic combination which threatens to overwhelm the government. Linked to that is that the international situation, which we were told at the time of the referendum was essentially benign for the United Kingdom to strike out on its own, a reliable partner in the United States, a reliable partner apparently for trading purposes and wanting to do a trade deal with China. All those things have entirely evaporated in the intervening period and have evaporated almost completely in the last 6 months. And we have a government that is undoubtedly led by an individual who has considerable oratorical skills, a unique ability to make people feel optimistic when in fact they should be cautious. And I'm afraid, and I think this has become pretty clear over the last 6 months, very little apparent sense of direction as to where he wishes to take the country or what his strategy is to get us out of our current difficulties. It appears to be entirely a reliance on a chief of staff who, I have to say, the more time goes by, the more unattractive I find him. And a cabinet which, with the probable exception of Rishi Sunak, who undoubtedly is a person of considerable ability, the others appear to be wholly overshadowed by the Prime Minister and unable to articulate any independent thinking at all, even though some of them are undoubtedly people of some ability if they were allowed to have their head. Now, where does that leave us as a movement which is interested in good links with Europe? Well, on the face of it, not in a very good place. But I think that as a movement, we have to take a long-term view, and we cannot just take a short-term view. A short-term view, which perhaps has been a tendency, is we don't want this to happen. Is there anything that we can do to try to make it stop? And the answer is, with a government with a majority of 80, that unless or until enough Conservative backbenchers decide that they are unhappy with the Prime Minister's leadership, which may be happening in bit by bit, but certainly is not happening to an extent sufficient to endanger his leadership at present, he will continue doing what he wants. And the evidence rather suggests that whereas last year there were quite a few of my Westminster Conservative colleagues who said, oh, well, just wait for Brexit to be over. Once we've done Brexit, you will find that the Prime Minister reverts to being a liberal Conservative, wants everything to quieten down, wants everything to go back to normal, and will actually adopt some very moderate policies. The evidence, it seems to me, is that probably partly prompted by the COVID economic crisis, actually, he is showing a tendency that he's shown on many occasions previously, which is that when he gets into a hole, it's not so much that he digs deeper, although you could argue he may be doing that, but he's prepared to make more and more reckless decisions to try to get himself out of it. Because as he is a conjurer, ultimately, if you stop the conjuring, the audience stops clapping. And that is the fundamental problem that this Prime Minister has got, whatever his intentions may be. And as I say, I think we should be mistaken to misread them too much, because I don't think he's ultimately an ideological individual at all. But he wants to survive, he wants to be loved, he wants to be seen as being the darling of the press, and all those things matter far more than pursuing policies which might be unpopular. So I don't know what's going to happen over the next 6 months. Some of my ex-colleagues at Westminster remain convinced that he will seek to do a deal with the EU. And I actually think that by instinct, he wants to do that deal. He doesn't want to see traffic piling up at Dover. He doesn't want to see the economic hit, which is still going to come even after the long period of preparation if we end up with no deal on December the 31st. But equally, he's certainly never going to extend transition. That was obvious to me from the outset, despite the perfectly well-intentioned campaign by the European movement, which I'm happy to support. But I always thought the chances of success were very low. And he is, I think, willing to accept no deal if he can't get a deal that he can sell. And look at how the problems are piling up for him. Look at the Northern Ireland issue, where he promised there wasn't going to be a border, and there now seems to be a border. All these are going to require further Houdini tricks as he goes along to try and get himself out of his mess. So I think we have to anticipate that one of two things are going to happen. Either we're going to end up leaving with no deal and with the consequences that go with it. That will be very damaging for the country. It might, oddly enough, be helpful for our movement, although I don't think it's something I would want to wish on the country. The other is that we end up with a whole series of short-term deals, and I don't think we should rule that out, because the EU itself, while it certainly doesn't want to give the UK a long-term deal on terms which favour other countries behaving in the same way, or give us the benefits of membership when we're outside, probably doesn't want to see a lot of disruption either. So I think that that is a possibility. Although if it is, then actually on the 1st of January next year, we're going to be facing a very similar pattern of problem to the one we've got at the moment in terms of having to have further negotiations and a no settled future for the United Kingdom at all. So what should we be doing as a movement? Well, I think we have to accept, as I say, that our involvement in this process is probably fairly peripheral. What we can do, and I think it's the most important thing of the lot, is latch on to a number of things where I think we're actually in tune with the British public, who don't actually have a Europhobia of any kind at all, even if they can be quite quirky about some aspects of EU membership. We need to build the view that UK is a European nation, and I think that we have a lot to help us in view of the current international crisis and events in the United States and with China to do that. Where else is our future going to be? We need to send out a message that we see ourselves as European. We want, as an organisation, and I'm doing this with the Conservative Group for Europe, to network with sister parties, for example, in Europe. And members of your organisation will be members of different political parties, and we want to maintain those links. And we want to have a dialogue about a future relationship in the long term, at a time when, in any event, the European Union is likely to be changing considerably and is going to be going through a period of thinking about what its future structures may be. I also think we need to concentrate on the UK's other roles in Europe. We are members of the Council of Europe, although Dominic Cummings seems to want to threaten that from time to time, because he keeps on saying it's unfinished business. My view is that our adherence to the European Convention on Human Rights and our participation in the Council of Europe is going to become even more important now we're gone. And actually, the arguments for staying in almost overwhelming, and we should be making them. After all, it was set up for specific issues of maintaining democracy, peace, and justice in Europe, and liberty. And for that reason, it's a very good forum for cooperation, and in one in which historically we have shown great leadership. So I think we can do that as well. And if we do all those things, then my feeling is that the opportunities will come along, because as Macmillan said, events, dear boy, events when it comes to politics, where we can start reinforcing the case that the United Kingdom's future is as a European nation and not as something else. And I think that all the economic facts and all the political facts are going to grow over time to support it. Now, of course, that requires patience on our part. It requires patience for your members, but it's also a challenge, and I think it's one that we can rise to. We are the biggest pro-European movement in Europe at the moment. And I think we've been born out of adversity, but I think we can do it. But it's going to need a lot of work and gradually pulling politicians, particularly from my ex-party, but one to which I still have good links and great friendships, into being willing to speak out for that basic fact. And as we look at what's happening on security particularly, the arguments just pile up more and more that the idea of the UK being some global player separate from our European partners is complete nonsense. Even the Prime Minister probably knows that. So I hope that leaves you on an optimistic note. I've taken my 15 minutes. I've probably taken too long. So I apologise if I've done that. I look forward to listening to Michael. Thank you very much.